June 7th, 1943. Arlington Hall Station, Virginia. The summer heat pressed down on the converted girls' school like a weighted blanket, turning the government facility into a steam bath. Inside room 212, Technical Sergeant William Foster wiped sweat from his brow as he stared at the jumble of letters on the intercept form, another encrypted German message that would likely join the growing pile of unsolvable puzzles. He believed, like many others, that the Americans were still months away from cracking the latest German encryption systems. How terribly wrong that assumption would prove to be. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the untold story of how a small secret unit of African-American mathematicians and engineers became the unexpected key to breaking the most sophisticated German encryption systems, forever altering the course of the Second World War and challenging deeply entrenched notions about who could contribute to the intellectual battlefield of cryptanalysis. "Another one from the Atlantic Network," said Army Private Evelyn Phillips as she dropped the intercept onto Foster's desk. "Signal Corps grabbed it around 0400. Command says priority 1. Foster nodded without looking up. The Signal Intelligence Service had been intercepting thousands of German messages each day, but the newer encryption systems remained largely impenetrable. The Germans had introduced additional complexity to their Enigma machine settings, creating what many American cryptanalysts considered an unbreakable code. "Thanks, Phillips." "Add it to the special collection for Colonel Friedman." "Already did, sir," she replied. "But there's something else. Colonel wants you in the East Wing now." Foster looked up, surprised. The East Wing was off limits to most personnel at Arlington Hall. Rumors swirled about what happened there. Some said it housed advanced calculating machines, others claimed it was where they kept captured enemy encryption devices. Few knew the truth. Did he say why? "No, sir. Just that it's urgent." 5 minutes later, Foster stood before a nondescript door with a simple placard reading, "Statistical Analysis Section." He knew the bland name was intentional misdirection. After showing his credentials to the armed guard, he was escorted down a long corridor to an office at the end of the hall. Colonel William Friedman, the legendary American cryptologist, sat behind his desk, his tired eyes fixed on a folder stamped "Ultra Secret." Beside him stood a man Foster didn't recognize, tall, bespectacled, with dark skin and an air of quiet authority. He wore civilian clothes but stood with military bearing. "Technical Sergeant Foster, sir, reporting as ordered." Friedman nodded. "Foster, thank you for coming promptly. I want you to meet Professor Elbert Johnson, Doctor of Mathematics from Howard University, and now a special consultant to our department." Foster extended his hand, momentarily surprised by the introduction. Black civilians with high-level clearance were rare at Arlington Hall, despite the growing number of African-American women working as code clerks. "Pleasure to meet you, Professor," Foster said. "Likewise, Sergeant," Johnson replied, his handshake firm. Friedman closed the folder on his desk. "Foster, I've selected you to serve as liaison to a new initiative. As you know, we've been struggling with the latest German encryption modifications. The British have made progress with their bombs at Bletchley Park, but we need our own solution." "Yes, sir. The additional rotors they've added to the Enigma machines have multiplied the possible combinations exponentially." Johnson nodded appreciatively. 614 million possible starting positions with the fourth rotor, to be precise. Friedman continued, "We've established a special unit to approach the problem from a different angle. Professor Johnson here has assembled a team of mathematicians and engineers from Howard, Wilberforce, and Tuskegee. They've been working in a separate facility for the past 4 months. Foster's surprise must have shown on his face because Johnson smiled slightly. "You're wondering why you haven't heard about this unit before," Johnson said. "The thought had crossed my mind, sir." Friedman stood up. "Follow me, both of you. It's time you saw what we've been working on." They drove in silence through the Virginia countryside for 30 minutes before reaching a converted textile mill, surrounded by a high fence and military police checkpoints. After passing through 3 separate security screenings, Foster found himself in a vast room filled with drafting tables, blackboards covered with complex equations, and dozens of African-American men and women working with intense concentration. "Welcome to Station 6, Friedman said. Officially, this facility doesn't exist. Foster took in the scene, noting the quiet efficiency with which everyone worked. At the center of the room stood what appeared to be a modified version of the American bomb, a complex electromechanical device designed to discover the daily settings for Enigma machines. But this one looked different. "Is that," Foster began. "The parallel processor," Johnson finished for him. "Our own design. Different from both the British bomb and your American versions, we've taken a fundamentally different approach to the problem." A young woman approached them, carrying a stack of papers filled with calculations. She couldn't have been more than 25 years old, Foster guessed. "Professor Johnson, we've completed the preliminary analysis on the naval transmissions," she said, seemingly unperturbed by the presence of strangers. "Thank you, Miss Blackwell." "Sergeant Foster, this is Dorothy Blackwell, mathematics prodigy and our lead theoretical analyst. She was 3 years into her doctorate at Howard when we recruited her." "Pleasure to meet you, ma'am," Foster said. "Sergeant," she acknowledged with a nod. "Professor, the preliminary results suggest a pattern in the officer dispatches from the North Atlantic corridor. The coincidence indices are higher than we would expect with true random distribution." Johnson's eyes lit up. "Show me." As they walked toward a blackboard, Foster turned to Friedman. "Sir, I don't understand. Why has this operation been kept separate from Arlington Hall?" Friedman's expression darkened. "Politics, Foster. Despite the President's executive order, 9802, prohibiting discrimination in the defense industry, integration remains challenging. We faced resistance to assembling this team within our main facilities." "So you built them their own?" "Precisely. The arrangement has advantages: complete autonomy, minimal interference, and," he lowered his voice, "protection from those who would undermine their work out of prejudice." Foster nodded, understanding the unspoken reality. Even in this moment of national crisis, racial barriers remained firmly in place. "And my role, sir?" "You're our bridge, Foster. You'll coordinate between Station 6 and Arlington Hall. These people are doing vital work that could shorten the war by years. I need someone I can trust to ensure nothing impedes their progress." Across the room, Johnson was already deep in conversation with Blackwell and several other team members, all gesturing at equations that covered an entire wall. "They're close to something, aren't they?" Foster asked. "Closer than anyone at Arlington Hall," Friedman confirmed. "They've developed a mathematical approach that may allow us to break the naval enigma without knowing any of the initial settings. If they succeed, it could change everything," Foster finished. "Indeed, the Germans believe their encryption is unbreakable. Their overconfidence is potentially their greatest weakness." Later that afternoon, Foster sat in a makeshift conference room with Johnson and his senior team members. The group included James Washington, a mechanical engineer from Tuskegee who had designed aircraft components before the war; Margaret Rhodes, a linguist who spoke 5 languages including German and Japanese; and Robert Turner, a former electrical engineer from Westinghouse who specialized in circuit design. "The fundamental flaw in German encryption isn't in their machines, but in human behavior," Johnson explained. "Operators make predictable choices, follow patterns, take shortcuts. Our approach exploits these human elements." Washington added, "And we've designed our processor to run multiple probability analyses simultaneously, something neither the British bombs nor your American machines are optimized to do." "We call it parallel thinking," Blackwell said. "Instead of testing each possible setting sequentially, we examine families of related settings simultaneously, eliminating vast swaths of possibilities based on probability distributions." Foster studied the schematics spread across the table. "This is remarkable work. How close are you to implementation?" The team members exchanged glances before Johnson answered. "We've already successfully decrypted several messages from the Atlantic Naval Network, messages that Arlington Hall classified as unbreakable." Foster's jaw dropped. "You've broken the naval 4-rotor enigma? When?" "First breakthrough was 7 weeks ago," Turner said proudly. "We've refined the process since then. Current decryption time averages 4 hours per message, but we're working to reduce that further." 4 hours? The main cryptanalysis division takes days, sometimes weeks, when they succeed at all." Johnson smiled faintly. Which is why Colonel Friedman has kept our operation compartmentalized. The fewer people who know, the better. The Germans still believe their communications are secure, Rhodes explained. That advantage disappears the moment they suspect otherwise. Foster nodded, beginning to appreciate the full significance of what this team had accomplished. And nobody thought to look for this capability among Negro mathematicians and engineers. Their oversight, Johnson said simply, our opportunity. The next morning, Foster returned to Arlington Hall with a small selection of decrypted messages, evidence of Station 6's breakthrough. He delivered them personally to Colonel Friedman, who immediately called an emergency meeting with his top staff. "Gentlemen," Friedman announced to the assembled group of white officers, "we've had a significant breakthrough with the German naval codes. These messages were decrypted within hours of interception." The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Major Lawrence Henderson, head of the European section, examined the decryptions with obvious skepticism. "How reliable are these translations, Colonel? And how were they obtained so quickly?" "They came from a specialized unit using an advanced mathematical approach," Friedman replied carefully, avoiding specifics. "Which unit?" Henderson pressed. "I wasn't aware of any group making this kind of progress." Foster noticed how Friedman sidestepped the question. "The unit's identity remains classified at the highest level. What matters is that we now have access to German naval communications in near real time." The implications were immediately apparent to everyone in the room. With this capability, Allied shipping could potentially avoid U-boat wolf packs. Convoy routes could be adjusted. Hunter-killer groups could be dispatched to precise coordinates. But as Foster observed the excitement build, he also sensed resistance from some quarters. Henderson, in particular, seemed disturbed by the development, or perhaps by being kept in the dark about it. After the meeting, Henderson cornered Foster in the hallway. "You delivered those decryptions, Foster. You know where they came from." "I'm not at liberty to discuss that, sir." Henderson's face hardened. "I've been working on German naval codes for 18 months. I find it hard to believe some secret unit has suddenly solved what my best people couldn't crack." "With all due respect, Major, perhaps they approached the problem differently. Or perhaps someone's overselling their capabilities," Henderson countered. "I want to meet these miracle workers, see their methods firsthand." "That's for Colonel Friedman to decide, sir." Henderson leaned closer. "Listen carefully, Sergeant. In cryptanalysis, verification is everything. I cannot in good conscience act on intelligence without confirming its source and reliability." Foster maintained his composure. "I understand your concerns, sir, but those are my orders." As Henderson walked away, Foster couldn't shake a feeling of unease. The success of Station 6 depended on secrecy, not just from the Germans, but also, it seemed, from certain elements within their own organization. Over the next 2 weeks, Foster shuttled between Arlington Hall and Station 6, bringing new intercepts and returning with decryptions. The team's efficiency improved daily, with decryption times dropping to under 3 hours per message. The intelligence proved invaluable, revealing U-boat positions, refueling schedules, and even hints about planned operations against Allied convoys. At Station 6, Foster grew to appreciate the unique atmosphere. Despite working under immense pressure, the team maintained a spirit of camaraderie and purpose. They had created their own culture, one where merit mattered more than background. "Most of us were teaching at universities before the war," Johnson explained one evening as they shared coffee. "Others worked in industry but hit the color barrier when they sought advancement. This is the first time many of us have been judged solely on our intellectual contributions." "It's not just about winning the war for us," Blackwell added. "It's about proving what we've always known, that given equal opportunity, we can contribute at the highest levels." Washington nodded in agreement. "My father couldn't even read. I have 2 engineering patents. My son will have opportunities we can't imagine yet, especially if we help win this war." Foster found himself increasingly drawn into their world. As the only white officer regularly present at Station 6, he initially felt like an outsider, but the team gradually accepted him as their liaison to the wider intelligence community. One afternoon, Turner pulled Foster aside to show him a modified circuit design for the parallel processor. "We've found a way to reduce the processing time by another 20%, he explained excitedly. "That's remarkable," Foster replied, studying the schematic. "Where did you learn this kind of engineering?" Turner's expression shifted slightly. "Before the war, I designed telephone switching systems for Bell Laboratories. Had 27 patents to my name, but they kept me in a separate facility, away from the main research teams. Called it organizational efficiency." "I'm sorry," Foster said, unsure what else to add. Turner shrugged. "Don't be. I'm doing more important work now than I ever did there, and working with people who respect my abilities." As July turned to August, the impact of Station 6's work became increasingly apparent. Admiral King himself sent a classified commendation, noting that convoy losses had dropped by 30% since the new intelligence began flowing. Lives were being saved daily because of this team's work, but with success came increased scrutiny. Major Henderson continued pressing for access to the source of the decryptions. During one tense meeting, he confronted Friedman directly. "Colonel, while I appreciate the intelligence we're receiving, I must insist on validating the methodology. My analysts have identified inconsistencies in some of the translations." Friedman remained impassive. "What inconsistencies specifically?" Henderson produced several documents. "Terminology choices that seem unusual for German naval communications. Word orders that don't match previous patterns. My concern is that we're being fed what we want to hear." Foster knew these weren't errors, but differences stemming from Station 6's direct mathematical approach rather than linguistic analysis. Their decryptions sometimes produced more literal translations that lacked the nuance a German linguist might provide. "I assure you, Major, the decryptions are accurate," Friedman stated. "Then allow me to meet the team responsible," Henderson insisted. "If they've truly broken the four-rotor enigma, my department should be collaborating with them, not kept in the dark." After the meeting, Friedman called Foster to his office. "Henderson isn't going to let this go," he said wearily. "And he has supporters in naval intelligence who share his concerns." "What are you suggesting, sir?" "A controlled demonstration. We'll bring Henderson to Station 6, show him enough to satisfy his questions without compromising security or the team's autonomy." "Professor Johnson won't like it," Foster warned. "Johnson understands the realities we're dealing with," Friedman replied. "Prepare him for the visit. 3 days from now." When Foster delivered the news to Johnson, the professor received it with resigned acceptance. "We knew this day would come eventually," he said. "The question is, are they genuinely interested in our methods, or are they looking for reasons to discredit us?" "I believe Major Henderson is primarily concerned with the reliability of the intelligence," Foster answered carefully. Johnson gave him a knowing look. "Is he? Or is he concerned that a group of Negro mathematicians has succeeded where his department failed?" Foster had no answer for that. The day of the demonstration arrived with palpable tension at Station 6. The team had prepared a controlled breaking of a recent intercept, showing their process step by step. Everyone was dressed formally, as if for an inspection. Major Henderson arrived with 2 of his analysts. From the moment he entered the facility, his demeanor conveyed skepticism. He barely acknowledged Johnson's greeting and showed visible surprise at the predominance of African-American personnel. "This is your cryptanalysis team?" he asked Friedman, making no effort to hide his disbelief. "Some of the finest mathematical minds in the country," Friedman replied evenly. Henderson's gaze swept across the room, lingering on the parallel processor. "And this contraption is how you're breaking Enigma faster than our standard bombs?" Johnson stepped forward. "Major Henderson, if you'll allow us to demonstrate our methodology, I believe your questions will be answered." The demonstration proceeded with Johnson and Blackwell explaining their probability-based approach, while Turner and Washington operated the parallel processor. They had selected a previously decrypted message for the demonstration, knowing exactly how long the process should take. Henderson watched intently, occasionally whispering to his analysts. When the decryption completed, producing the exact German message they had previously translated, he remained unimpressed. "This proves nothing," he declared. "You could have pre-programmed this result." Johnson maintained his composure. "We anticipated such concerns, Major. Perhaps you'd care to select a new intercept from your own collection." one we couldn't possibly have prepared for. Henderson hesitated, then produced a folder from his briefcase. This message was intercepted this morning. None of your people could have seen it. Blackwell took the intercept form, studied it briefly, then fed the encrypted text into their system. This will take approximately 2 hours and 45 minutes, based on message length and complexity, she explained. Henderson checked his watch. I'll wait. The atmosphere grew increasingly tense as the parallel processor worked through its calculations. Johnson's team continued their regular duties, but Foster could see they were all acutely aware of Henderson's scrutinizing presence. At one point, Henderson approached Washington as he adjusted a component of the machine. "Where did you learn to build something like this?" he asked, his tone suggesting he doubted Washington's capabilities. "Tuskegee Institute, then Massachusetts Institute of Technology, sir," Washington replied without looking up. "I designed aircraft electrical systems before the war." Henderson seemed surprised by this response, but made no comment. 2 hours and 37 minutes after beginning, the parallel processor completed its work. Blackwell carefully transcribed the decrypted message, while Rhodes verified the translation from German. When they presented the result to Henderson, his expression shifted from skepticism to astonishment. The message detailed plans for a U-boat rendezvous near the coast of Brazil, valuable intelligence that couldn't have been fabricated. "This is remarkable," he admitted reluctantly, "but I still don't understand how your approach differs fundamentally from what we're doing at Arlington Hall." Johnson exchanged glances with his team before responding. "Major, with respect, your analysts are approaching the problem sequentially, testing each possible setting until you find a match. We're analyzing mathematical patterns that exist independently of the physical Enigma machine. In essence," Blackwell added, "we're not trying to replicate the encryption process. We're identifying the statistical anomalies that reveal the underlying structure." Henderson's analysts were now openly taking notes, clearly impressed by what they were witnessing. Henderson himself seemed conflicted, professionally impressed, but personally unsettled by the revelation that this team of African-American mathematicians and engineers had developed capabilities beyond what his own department had achieved. As the visit concluded, Friedman pulled Henderson aside for a private conversation, while Foster spoke with Johnson and his team. "You've convinced him," Foster said quietly. "Perhaps," Johnson replied. "But convincing someone of your competence isn't the same as earning their respect." "You've earned mine," Foster said with sincerity. "And more importantly, you've earned results that are saving lives daily." Johnson nodded appreciatively. "Results speak louder than prejudice, Sergeant, but they rarely speak loud enough to silence it completely." That evening, as Foster prepared to return to Arlington Hall, Blackwell approached him with a folded piece of paper. "We've been analyzing patterns in recent U-boat communications," she said. "This is different from the usual tactical messages." Foster examined the decryption. It appeared to be discussing a new communication protocol scheduled to be implemented in September. "They're planning another upgrade to their encryption system," Blackwell explained. "If our analysis is correct, they'll be adding another layer of complexity to the Enigma settings." "Can you break it?" Foster asked. "We believe so, but we'll need to modify our equipment. Mr. Turner has already drawn up plans for the necessary changes." Foster folded the paper and tucked it into his pocket. "I'll take this directly to Colonel Friedman. This is exactly the kind of advance warning we need." As he drove back to Arlington Hall that evening, Foster reflected on the remarkable individuals he'd met at Station 6. They worked tirelessly, knowing their contributions would likely go unrecognized in the official history of the war. Yet they persisted, driven by patriotism, professional pride, and perhaps the hope that their work might help create a future where their children would be judged by their abilities rather than the color of their skin. Back at Arlington Hall, Foster delivered Blackwell's findings to Colonel Friedman, who immediately recognized their significance. "This gives us a critical advantage," Friedman said, studying the decryption. "Knowing about the change in advance means we can prepare accordingly." "Professor Johnson believes they can modify their equipment to handle the new system before it's implemented," Foster added. "Excellent. Make sure they have whatever resources they need." Friedman set the paper down. "And the demonstration today? Your impression?" Henderson was convinced by the technical demonstration, but he remains uncomfortable with who delivered it, Friedman finished. I suspected as much. Will it be a problem? Not immediately. The results are too important to ignore, but Henderson has connections in Washington, and not everyone appreciates the unique composition of our Station 6 team. Foster felt a surge of protectiveness toward Johnson and his people. Sir, what they're accomplishing is extraordinary. Surely that counts for more than... In an ideal world, yes, Friedman interrupted. But we're fighting this war in the world as it exists, not as we might wish it to be. He sighed. For now, we continue as before. Station 6 remains compartmentalized, and you remain their primary contact with Arlington Hall. As August progressed into September, the predicted German encryption changes began to appear in intercepted messages. Thanks to Blackwell's analysis and Turner's modifications to the parallel processor, Station 6 maintained their ability to decrypt the communications, though the process now took slightly longer. The intelligence continued to provide the Allies with a crucial advantage in the Battle of the Atlantic. U-boat wolfpacks found their intended targets mysteriously absent. Ambush attempts failed, as convoys altered course based on advanced knowledge of enemy positions. The German Naval Command began to question how the Allies were anticipating their movements so accurately. One afternoon, Foster arrived at Station 6 to find the team in a state of high excitement. Johnson met him at the entrance, barely containing his enthusiasm. "We've intercepted something extraordinary," the professor said, leading Foster to the main workroom. A message from German Naval High Command expressing concern about potential intelligence leaks. Foster examined the decryption. The message speculated about various security breaches, but notably absent was any suspicion that their encryption had been compromised. "They still believe Enigma is unbreakable," he observed. "Precisely," Johnson replied. "They're looking for human sources, spies, informants, traitors, never considering that their perfect machine might be the vulnerability. Their overconfidence continues to work in our favor. For now," Johnson cautioned, "but they're not fools. Eventually they'll consider all possibilities, including the one they currently find unthinkable." The concern proved prescient. Within days, new intercepts revealed that German counterintelligence was launching a systematic investigation into all possible sources of security breaches. They began changing U-boat protocols, patrol patterns, and communication schedules. In mid-September, Station 6 decrypted a message that sent a chill through the entire operation. The German Navy had decided to add a fifth rotor to selected Enigma machines as a precautionary measure, vastly increasing the complexity of the encryption. When Foster reported this development to Friedman, the colonel's face grew grave. "Can Johnson's team handle this additional complexity?" "They're already working on modifications to their approach," Foster replied, "but Professor Johnson estimates it could take weeks to adapt their systems, possibly months." "We don't have months, Sergeant. Every day without this intelligence puts our convoys at greater risk." "There's more, sir," Foster added reluctantly. The same intercept mentioned a security conference in Berlin scheduled for October. Naval communication security is the primary agenda item. Friedman paced his office. "They're beginning to suspect, not specifically that we've broken Enigma, but that something is compromising their operational security." He stopped suddenly. "We need to accelerate Station 6's work on the 5-rotor problem, and we need contingency plans if they make more drastic changes." "What kind of contingency plans, sir?" "The kind we hope we never have to implement," Friedman replied cryptically. As September waned, the mood at Station 6 grew increasingly tense. The team worked around the clock to adapt their methods to the anticipated 5-rotor Enigma, but progress came slowly. The mathematical complexity had increased by orders of magnitude. One evening, Foster found Blackwell alone in the computer room, surrounded by pages of calculations, her eyes red from exhaustion. "You should rest, Miss Blackwell," he suggested gently. "You've been at this for 20 hours straight." She shook her head. "We're close to something. I can feel it." She pointed to a series of equations. "The 5th rotor creates over 140 million new possible combinations, but if we can identify statistical patterns in rotor selection..." Even so, you can't solve it if you collapse from exhaustion. She finally looked up at him, her expression a mixture of determination and vulnerability. Do you know why I volunteered for this project, Sergeant Foster? I assumed for the same reasons as the others, to contribute to the war effort, to use your skills. My brother was on the USS Juno, lost at Guadalcanal. Her voice remained steady, but her eyes revealed the depth of her grief. 140 men survived the initial attack. Only 10 were rescued. The others— I'm sorry, Foster said softly. The Navy couldn't find them because of communication failures and flawed intelligence. I promised myself no other family would lose someone because we couldn't get the right information to the right people at the right time. She turned back to her calculations. So yes, I'll rest, but not yet. Foster left her to her work, more convinced than ever of the importance of what Station 6 was accomplishing. These weren't just abstract mathematical exercises, they were efforts that directly saved lives. The next morning, Johnson called an emergency meeting of the entire team. Turner had made a breakthrough in the circuit design that might allow the parallel processor to handle the 5-rotor complexity within the available time constraints. The solution isn't to process more possibilities, Turner explained, pointing to his modified schematic. It's to eliminate more impossibilities before processing begins. Washington nodded in understanding. Pre-filtering based on known operator behaviors and mechanical constraints of the Enigma machine itself. Exactly, Turner confirmed. By incorporating what we know about how the machines are actually used, rather than how they could theoretically be used, we can reduce the problem space significantly. Rhodes, who had been analyzing patterns in operator behaviors, added, German operators almost never use consecutive letters in rotor settings or repeat settings from previous days. They avoid using letters from the message key in the rotor settings. These human patterns create vulnerabilities we can exploit. The modified approach seemed promising, but implementing the changes would require reconfiguring significant portions of the parallel processor. The team divided into groups, each tackling a different aspect of the challenge. As Foster prepared to return to Arlington Hall with their latest findings, Johnson walked with him to the door. We're in a race now, Sergeant. The Germans are moving toward greater security while we're scrambling to keep pace. You'll win that race, Professor, Foster said with confidence. You've overcome every obstacle so far. Johnson smiled faintly. Perhaps. But remember what I told you before. They still don't believe their encryption can be broken, especially not by people who look like us. That assumption is our greatest advantage. And if they ever realize their mistake, then the advantage shifts dramatically, Johnson replied soberly, and this chapter of the war takes a much darker turn. The first week of October 1943 brought an unusual autumn chill to Virginia. At Station 6, the modified parallel processor hummed day and night as Johnson's team raced to solve the 5-rotor problem before the German Navy could fully implement their security upgrades. The walls of the main work area were now covered with complex probability trees and statistical models mapping potential encryption pathways. Foster arrived one morning to find the facility in a state of controlled chaos. Equipment had been disassembled and reconfigured. New circuit boards were being tested. Team members moved purposefully between workstations, their conversations a mixture of advanced mathematics and engineering terminology. Progress report, Foster asked as Johnson emerged from the computer room. We're getting closer, Johnson replied, leading Foster to a quieter corner of the facility. Turner's circuit modifications are working better than expected. Washington and his engineering team have expanded the processing capacity by 30%. Rhodes has compiled an extensive analysis of operator tendencies that's helping us narrow the probability fields. And Blackwell, Johnson smiled. Dorothy made the breakthrough. She identified a mathematical relationship between the 4th and 5th rotor positions that reduces the problem complexity significantly. If her equations hold up under testing, you could maintain decryption capabilities even after the Germans implement the new system. That's the hope, Johnson confirmed. Initial tests are promising, but we need more real-world intercepts to validate the approach. As if on cue, a young corporal from Signal Intelligence arrived with a new batch of intercepted messages. including several that appeared to use the experimental 5-rotor configuration. "Perfect timing," Johnson said, taking the intercepts. "These will let us test Blackwell's hypothesis under actual conditions." The team gathered around the parallel processor as Blackwell explained her approach. "The Germans believe adding a 5th rotor creates an exponential increase in security. And mathematically they're correct, but they've overlooked something critical: the physical and operational constraints of their own system." She pointed to a complex equation on the blackboard. "The 5th rotor must work in mechanical harmony with the others. This creates dependent relationships between rotor positions that we can exploit. Additionally, the human operators must manage this increased complexity, which leads them to adopt simplifications and patterns in how they establish daily settings." Turner added, "We've modified the processor to prioritize these high-probability setting combinations, effectively searching the most likely configurations first, rather than working through all possibilities sequentially." "How confident are you?" Foster asked. Blackwell and Turner exchanged glances. 80%, Blackwell answered. "Possibly higher once we fine-tune the system with these new intercepts." For the next several hours, Foster watched as the team worked to decrypt one of the 5-rotor messages. The process took longer than their previous efforts, nearly 6 hours from start to finish. But when they finally broke through, the room erupted in quiet celebration. "We did it," Blackwell whispered, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. Johnson examined the decrypted text. U-boat deployment orders for the North Atlantic, coordinates, timing, patrol patterns, everything Allied convoys would need to avoid interception. Foster felt a surge of pride in what this team had accomplished. "This is extraordinary work. Colonel Friedman needs to see this immediately." Back at Arlington Hall, Friedman reviewed the decryption with barely contained excitement. "They've done it again. This could be the turning point in the Atlantic campaign." "There's more, sir," Foster said, handing over additional papers. "Professor Johnson believes they can reduce the decryption time to under 4 hours within a week, possibly faster, as they refine their methods." Friedman studied the technical specifications. "The mathematical approach they're taking, it's revolutionary, different from anything we or the British have attempted. They're thinking beyond the mechanical problem," Foster explained. "Their focus is on the statistical patterns and human elements that even the Germans don't recognize in their own systems." Friedman nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes it takes outsiders to see what insiders have missed." He gathered the papers into a folder. "This goes directly to Admiral King. In the meantime, tell Johnson to proceed with all possible speed on the refinements." As Foster turned to leave, Friedman added, "And Foster, make sure the team knows the significance of what they've accomplished. They've just changed the course of the Atlantic campaign." The next few weeks saw a flurry of activity as Station 6 refined their methods and increased their decryption output. Intelligence from the broken 5-rotor messages allowed Allied forces to anticipate German naval movements with unprecedented accuracy. U-boat effectiveness plummeted as convoys routinely avoided their patrol zones. Supply ships reached England safely, ensuring the continued build-up of forces for the planned invasion of Europe. But success brought complications. As October turned to November, Foster noticed increased interest from other military departments in Station 6's work. Naval Intelligence, the Army Signal Corps, even representatives from British liaison offices began requesting access to the facility and its methods. "We're becoming too visible," Johnson worried during one of their strategy sessions. "Our security depends on absolute compartmentalization." Foster shared this concern. "Colonel Friedman is doing everything possible to maintain operational security, but the results speak too loudly to ignore completely." The situation came to a head when Major Henderson returned to Arlington Hall after a trip to Washington. He requested an immediate meeting with Friedman and Foster. "The Office of Naval Intelligence wants direct access to the source of our decryptions," Henderson announced without preamble. "Admiral Forrest has signed the authorization personally." Friedman remained outwardly calm. "On what grounds?" "Coordination of intelligence efforts. They're establishing a new joint cryptanalysis division and want all relevant operations under unified command." "Station 6 operates under Army jurisdiction," Friedman pointed out. Naval intelligence has no authority there. Henderson's expression hardened. This comes directly from the Joint Chiefs, Colonel. They want the operation transferred to the main cryptanalysis facility, where it can be properly integrated with existing efforts. Foster understood the real meaning behind the bureaucratic language. Station 6's independence had allowed Johnson's team to work without the racial restrictions common at main military facilities. Integration would mean dismantling the unique environment that had made their success possible. "And what happens to the current personnel?" Foster asked. Henderson glanced at him dismissively. Essential technical staff would be retained in appropriate positions. "Meaning what exactly?" Foster pressed. "That's not for me to decide," Henderson replied. "But I imagine some reorganization would be necessary to align with standard protocols." After Henderson left, Friedman turned to Foster with grave concern. "This is political maneuvering disguised as military necessity. Once they dismantle Station 6, Johnson's team will be split up and their methods absorbed into conventional operations." "They can't do that," Foster protested. "The success of the operation depends on the team working together, developing their unique approach." "I agree," Friedman said. "But we need leverage to maintain their independence." He thought for a moment. How close is the team to their next breakthrough? Johnson mentioned they were working on something new. "They've been analyzing patterns in high-level German command communications," Foster explained. "Different encryption protocols from the naval systems, but potentially more valuable in terms of strategic intelligence." "That could be our answer," Friedman decided. "If they can demonstrate another significant breakthrough before this transfer order is implemented, it strengthens our position enormously." Foster nodded. "I'll inform Professor Johnson immediately." At Station 6, Johnson received the news with characteristic composure, though Foster could see the tension in his eyes. "How much time do we have?" 2 weeks, possibly less," Foster replied. "How close are you to cracking the command-level encryption?" Johnson led him to a separate room where Blackwell Rhodes and 2 other mathematicians were working on a new set of equations. "We've identified structural weaknesses in their command cipher. It's more sophisticated than Enigma in some ways, simpler in others. The problem is computational power. We need to expand our processing capabilities significantly." Washington and Turner joined them, carrying design specifications for new equipment. "We can build what we need," Washington said confidently, "but not with our current resources. We'd need additional components, more vacuum tubes, specialized wiring." "Make a complete list," Foster instructed. "I'll get you whatever you need, however I need to get it." The next 48 hours became a frantic race to secure resources. Foster navigated military bureaucracy, called in personal favors, and occasionally bent regulations to obtain the necessary components. Trucks arrived at Station 6 loaded with equipment officially designated for other projects. Team members worked around the clock, modifying their systems and refining their mathematical approaches. 5 days into their 2-week window, they attempted their first decryption of a high-level command message. The process failed 3 times before they identified flaws in their initial assumptions. Blackwell and Rhodes reworked the core algorithms, while Washington and Turner reconfigured the hardware. On their 4th attempt, 7 days after receiving news of the impending transfer, they achieved a partial decryption, enough to confirm they were on the right track, but not enough to extract actionable intelligence. "We need more time," Johnson told Foster during a rare break. Both men looked exhausted, having barely slept in days. "Time is the one resource I can't get you," Foster replied grimly. "Henderson has accelerated the timeline. The transfer order is expected any day now." "Then we work faster," Johnson said simply, returning to the main room. That night, as Foster prepared to return to Arlington Hall, Blackwell stopped him at the door. "Sergeant, there's something you should know. We've been keeping detailed records of our methods, our mathematical approaches, everything we've learned." "For the official reports?" Foster asked, confused. "No," she replied quietly. "As insurance." She handed him a small notebook filled with densely written formulas and diagrams. "This is a summary of our core methodologies, the fundamental insights that make our approach work. If they dismantle this team, these records ensure our work won't be lost or misrepresented." Foster understood the significance of what she was sharing. You want me to keep this safe? We've prepared multiple copies. Each key team member has one. But yes, we need someone outside the team who understands the significance of what we've done. Foster carefully tucked the notebook into his inside pocket. I'll protect this, but let's hope it doesn't come to that. The next morning brought unexpected news. One of the command messages they had partially decrypted contained references to a high-level strategy meeting scheduled in Berlin for November 15th. Present would be senior naval commanders, intelligence officers, and cryptography experts discussing, among other things, the security of their communication systems. This is exactly what we need, Foster realized. If we can decrypt the full details of this meeting, participants, agenda, specific concerns, it would demonstrate the strategic value of keeping your team intact. Johnson agreed. We'll focus all our resources on this specific intercept. Rhodes, prioritize linguistic patterns related to military conferences and security protocols. Turner, Washington, reconfigure for maximum processing power on this single task. Blackwell, refine your algorithm to target this specific message structure. For the next 36 hours, the team worked without interruption, breaking only for short naps on cots set up in the corners of the workroom. Foster stayed with them, helping where he could and providing encouragement when frustration mounted. Their dedication paid off in the early hours of the morning on November 12th. The parallel processor completed its final calculations and the decrypted message emerged, complete and readable. "We've done it," Johnson announced, the exhaustion in his voice overshadowed by satisfaction. "Full decryption of a high-level command communication." Foster read through the message, his excitement growing with each paragraph. The Berlin Security Conference would include comprehensive reviews of all encryption systems, with particular attention to the naval codes. Concerns had been raised about potential vulnerabilities, though the Germans still considered actual breaches technically impossible. Most significantly, the message contained a complete list of attendees, including senior officers from U-Boat Command, technical experts from the Cryptography Division, and intelligence officials. "This is exactly what we needed," Foster said. "This isn't just tactical information, it's strategic intelligence of the highest order. It proves your methods can reach into the German High Command's most secure communications." Johnson nodded. "We need to get this to Colonel Friedman immediately. The transfer order could arrive any time now." Foster rushed back to Arlington Hall with the decryption, arriving just as Friedman was entering his office for the day. The colonel read through the intelligence with growing appreciation of its significance. "This is remarkable," he said finally, "and perfectly timed. Admiral King is meeting with the Joint Chiefs this morning to discuss the proposed reorganization of cryptanalysis operations. This gives me exactly the ammunition I need. Sir, Johnson's team needs to remain intact and independent. Their methods—" "I understand completely, Foster," Friedman interrupted, "and I'll make that case in the strongest possible terms. This level of intelligence justifies special operational considerations." Friedman left immediately for Washington, while Foster returned to Station 6 to update Johnson and his team. The waiting was agonizing. Hours passed with no word from Friedman or Arlington Hall. The team tried to continue their work, but the uncertainty of their future made concentration difficult. Late that evening, Foster received a telephone call from Friedman. "The Admiral was impressed," the colonel reported. "Very impressed. He's agreed to postpone any decision on reorganization pending further demonstration of the team's capabilities." "That's good news," Foster said cautiously. "But not a permanent solution." "No," Friedman acknowledged, "but it buys us time to make a more comprehensive case. The intelligence community now understands there's something unique happening at Station 6. Our challenge is to prove that this uniqueness is tied to the team itself, not just their methods or equipment." The reprieve gave Station 6 breathing room to consolidate their advances and further refine their approach to command-level communications. By early December, they had successfully decrypted multiple high-level messages, providing unprecedented insight into German strategic thinking. Then came the breakthrough they had been hoping for. On December 10th, Station 6 intercepted and decrypted a message revealing that the German High Command had ordered a comprehensive security review of all communication systems. Suspicious of information leaks, they had decided to implement entirely new encryption protocols for their most sensitive communications, beginning in January 1944. "This is it," Johnson told his team as they gathered to analyze the implications. "They still don't believe their encryption has been broken, but they're taking precautionary measures anyway." "Can we crack their new systems?" Foster asked. Johnson looked around at his exhausted but determined team. "If we have enough intercepts to analyze the structure, yes, but we need to act quickly before they fully implement the changes." For the next 2 weeks, Station 6 focused all their resources on understanding the new encryption protocols being tested by the Germans. Progress came in fits and starts. The new systems incorporated elements of the previous ones, but added layers of complexity specifically designed to thwart the kind of statistical analysis that had made Johnson's team so effective. As Christmas approached, morale began to waver. The technical challenges seemed increasingly daunting, and the team was exhausted from months of intense work with few breaks. Foster noticed the strain on everyone's faces, the shorter tempers, the moments of doubt. During a rare quiet moment, he found Johnson alone in his office, staring at a photograph of his family. "Your wife and children?" Foster asked. Johnson nodded. "My son James is 15, wants to study engineering like Washington. My daughter Eleanor is 12, already better at mathematics than I was at 18. He smiled faintly. "I promised them I'd be home for Christmas. Now I'm not sure that's possible." Foster understood the sacrifice. "What you're doing here matters, Professor. It's saving lives." "I know," Johnson replied. "But sometimes I wonder if anyone will ever know what we accomplished here. When the histories of this war are written, will there be any mention of Station 6? Of a team of Negro mathematicians and engineers who helped turn the tide against the Germans?" "I'll know," Foster said firmly. "Colonel Friedman will know. The lives saved because of your work. They won't know your names, but they'll live because of what you did here." Johnson considered this, then straightened his shoulders. "You're right, of course. The work matters more than recognition." He put the photograph away. "Now, let's see if we can make one more breakthrough before the year ends." The turning point came 3 days before Christmas. Blackwell, who had been working virtually non-stop for 72 hours, called everyone to the main room. On the blackboard was a complex series of equations, unlike anything Foster had seen before. "I've been approaching this all wrong," she explained, her voice hoarse from exhaustion but her eyes bright with discovery. "The new German system isn't just an evolution of their previous approaches. It's a hybrid that combines elements of different encryption methods." She pointed to a particular section of the equations. "Here's the key insight. They're using a polyalphabetic substitution combined with transposition. But the transposition follows a predictable pattern based on the date and message originator." Turner studied the equations, then nodded slowly. "Which means we can work backward from the date and originator to narrow down the possible transpositions." "Exactly," Blackwell confirmed. "It reduces the computational requirements substantially." Washington was already sketching modifications to their equipment. "We can reconfigure the parallel processor to test multiple transposition patterns simultaneously. If Blackwell's analysis is correct, we could break these new codes almost as quickly as the old ones." The team immediately set to work implementing Blackwell's insights. Foster watched with growing admiration as they transformed theoretical mathematics into practical cryptanalysis tools. Their dedication seemed to renew itself with this fresh challenge, exhaustion temporarily forgotten in the excitement of innovation. On Christmas Eve, they were ready to test their approach on a recent intercept using the new German protocols. The entire team gathered around as the modified parallel processor began its work. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the mechanical clicks and whirs of the machine. Just after midnight, technically Christmas Day, the processor completed its run. Blackwell carefully examined the output, then looked up with a smile that lit the room more brightly than the sparse holiday decorations they had managed to put up. "We did it," she announced. Full decryption in 5 hours, 23 minutes. The team erupted in cheers and congratulations. The message itself was relatively mundane, administrative details about fuel allocations for the Eastern Front, but the significance of breaking the new encryption system overshadowed the content. Johnson shook Blackwell's hand formally, then surprised everyone by pulling her into a quick, fatherly embrace. Magnificent work, Dorothy. Truly groundbreaking. Foster felt a lump in his throat watching the team celebrate their achievement. They had overcome not only the technical challenges of breaking seemingly unbreakable codes, but had done so while fighting against the prejudices and limitations imposed by their own country. As the celebration quieted, Johnson addressed the group. This success belongs to all of you. Each person in this room has contributed something essential to our work. When we began this project, many doubted whether we were capable of the intellectual and technical challenges involved. You have answered those doubts definitively. He turned to Foster. And we've had allies who judged us by our abilities rather than our appearances. Sergeant Foster has been our champion at Arlington Hall, ensuring we received the resources and support we needed to succeed. Foster felt humbled by the acknowledgement. I only helped create the conditions. You did the impossible. Not impossible, Johnson corrected with a smile. Merely improbable. And now I believe we've all earned a day of rest. Go home to your families if you can. Celebrate Christmas. We've given ourselves and our country a remarkable gift. As the team dispersed for their brief holiday break, Foster remained behind to help Johnson secure the facility. Will you make it home to your family after all? He asked. Yes, Johnson replied, for 2 days at least. And you? No family nearby, Foster said. I'll be back at Arlington Hall writing up reports on your breakthrough for Colonel Friedman. Johnson nodded understandingly. When you write those reports, Sergeant, remember that what happened here wasn't just about breaking German codes. It was about breaking American ones too, the codes of prejudice and limitation that have constrained people like us for generations. I understand, Foster assured him, and for what it's worth, I believe things will change after this war. They have to. Perhaps, Johnson said thoughtfully, but change rarely comes without struggle. The Germans will eventually realize their encryption has been compromised, just as America will eventually have to confront its contradictions. The question is whether we'll be ready when that moment arrives. In January 1944, Station 6's breakthrough paid tremendous dividends. Their ability to decrypt the new German protocols provided Allied commanders with unprecedented intelligence as they prepared for the invasion of Europe. U-boat effectiveness continued to decline as their positions and plans became known to Allied forces almost as soon as the orders were transmitted. By February, the Germans began to suspect something was seriously wrong with their communication security. Intercepts revealed increasing paranoia among the German High Command, with accusations of espionage and treachery becoming common. Yet they still could not bring themselves to believe that their sophisticated encryption systems had been compromised, especially not by Americans, whom they considered technically inferior to German engineering prowess. In a particularly revealing message decrypted by Blackwell's team, a senior German communications officer wrote, "The possibility of systematic cryptanalytic penetration remains negligible. American technical capabilities are inadequate for such achievements. The leaks must originate from human sources within our command structure." When Foster shared this assessment with Johnson, the professor smiled wryly. Their greatest weakness was never their encryption systems, but their arrogance. They couldn't imagine being outsmarted, especially not by people they considered inherently inferior, whether Americans in general or Negro Americans in particular. They never knew what hit them, Foster agreed. And by the time they began to suspect, it was already too late, Johnson added. The strategic advantage had shifted irreversibly. In March, Colonel Friedman visited Station 6 personally to deliver news from Washington. The unique contributions of Johnson's team had been recognized at the highest levels of military intelligence. Station 6 would remain independent for the duration of the war, with expanded resources and personnel. More significantly, a new directive had been issued establishing similar specialized units, focusing on Japanese military codes, drawing talent from diverse pools that had previously been overlooked due to racial or gender discrimination. "Your success has changed minds in Washington," Friedman told the assembled team. "Not everyone's, certainly, but enough to make a difference. You've proven that intelligence and ability transcend the artificial barriers we too often place between us." As spring turned to summer, the Allied invasion of Normandy proceeded with the benefit of intelligence provided by Station 6 and similar operations. German attempts to counter the invasion were repeatedly compromised by their inability to communicate securely, with orders intercepted and decrypted sometimes before their own commanders received them. By July, with Allied forces established in France and beginning their push toward Germany, the Germans finally accepted the unthinkable. Their encryption systems had somehow been broken. They implemented emergency security protocols, changing their systems completely. But it was too late. The strategic momentum had shifted decisively, and Station 6 had already begun working on the new systems. The cycle would continue until Germany's final surrender in May 1945. In the aftermath of victory, as military units disbanded and temporary wartime facilities closed, Foster met with Johnson one last time at the nearly empty Station 6. Most of the equipment had been removed, the blackboards erased, the team members returned to civilian life or reassigned to new military roles. "What will you do now?" Foster asked as they walked through the quiet rooms. "Return to Howard University," Johnson replied. "Resume teaching mathematics to the next generation. Most of our team will do something similar. Go back to the universities and industries that had limited their opportunities before the war. After what you've accomplished, surely those limitations will change." Johnson's expression was both hopeful and realistic. "Some will. Others will remain, perhaps in less obvious forms. But we've demonstrated what's possible when artificial barriers are removed. That knowledge can't be erased, even if the details of our work here remain classified for decades." Foster nodded, understanding the bittersweet nature of their victory. These men and women had helped save countless lives and significantly shortened the war, yet most would return to a society that still failed to recognize their full humanity and potential. "I've been authorized to tell you something," Foster said. "A small group of German cryptanalysts were captured in May. During interrogation, they finally learned that their codes had been broken systematically by Allied cryptanalysts." "How did they react?" Johnson asked. "Disbelief, initially, then technical curiosity. They wanted to meet the minds that had outsmarted them." Foster paused. "When told that some of the key breakthroughs came from African-American mathematicians and engineers, one of them, their senior cryptographer, refused to believe it. Said it was American propaganda." Johnson laughed softly. "They never knew. Even at the end, they couldn't imagine it." His exact words were recorded. "Impossible. Such work requires the highest mathematical training and technical sophistication. No Negro could possess such capabilities." "And that blindness was their downfall," Johnson observed. "They believed their own propaganda about racial superiority so completely that they couldn't recognize the threat until it was too late." As they prepared to part ways, Johnson handed Foster a small package. "Our team wanted you to have this, a token of appreciation for your support throughout our time here." Inside was a finely crafted wooden box containing a miniature model of the parallel processor, detailed down to the smallest components, along with a book containing signatures and personal notes from every member of Station 6. "I don't know what to say," Foster said, deeply moved. "You don't need to say anything," Johnson replied. "Just remember what happened here. Remember that when people are judged by their abilities rather than their appearances, remarkable things become possible." Foster extended his hand. "It's been the honor of my life working with you and your team, Professor Johnson." Johnson shook his hand firmly. "The honor has been mutual, Sergeant Foster. Perhaps someday the full story of Station 6 will be told. Until then, we'll carry it with us." As Foster drove away from the facility for the final time, he reflected on the extraordinary achievements he had witnessed. A group of brilliant minds, previously marginalized and underestimated, had played a crucial role in defeating one of the most dangerous regimes in human history. They had done so, not just through their technical skills, but through the unique perspectives they brought to problems that others couldn't solve. The Germans never knew that their supposedly unbreakable codes had been systematically deciphered by people they considered intellectually inferior. By the time they began to suspect the truth, it was already too late. Their strategic positions had been compromised, their military operations anticipated, their technological advantages neutralized. In that miscalculation lay a profound lesson about the dangers of arrogance and prejudice, a lesson that extended far beyond cryptography or military strategy to touch on the most fundamental human questions of equality, opportunity, and untapped potential. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.